for all the meetings that happened for this David Blaine stunt to happen, right? There's all the logistics you have to work through.
Yeah.
There was a meeting where someone goes, maybe even David Blaine himself goes, okay, now, if I have to shit.
Worth planning.
I mean, to
Like,
be fair,
they
given
probably had
his
to contact
career,
the EPA. Like, they had to probably, there were phone calls and emails. There's probably a Slack channel devoted just to taking care of what happens if he has to pee or poop.
I mean, Blaine has probably had to have that conversation a lot of times, right? Like every single one of his stunts involves conversations you would have to have about peeing and pooping with strangers. Like it must be something he's very comfortable having conversations with people about.
I did science journalism for a while. I think I probably told you guys about it before, and it was my favorite because a lot of it was taking something complicated on a science website and then spending time like translating it. And
she's back.
Nobody's saying
anything. You're fine.
Did I lose my connection? I could fix that in the edit. Nobody would know.
Now we just look rude.
No. Her internet shot out as we were talking about David Blaine taking a poop. Go on.
What I love is it's gonna be like Contact, where she's gonna have 18 hours worth of
but the
missing,
truth is, it recorded 18 hours. Oh.
Wait, am I back?
Yeah, you're back now.
Okay,
you're back
I can't tell. And
that was not an intentional gaslighting.
No, we're not creating the illusion.
Did you pre-plan this?
Just ignore Cartman.
Yeah. So one of the most fun stories I ever had to write was about how NASA was actually legitimately trying to figure out a way to safely let their astronauts poop inside of spacesuits for long-haul flights without like doing damage to their skin. They were like, could we create like a vacuum? Do they permanently have hoses in their butts? They couldn't figure it out, so they had to launch a competition for it. So it ended up being like global prize money to figure out how to let astronauts shit in their spacesuits. Yeah,
those competitions are always amazing, though. Like the ingenuity that people come up with. To me, that's a way better way to do R&D anyway, because it's like, okay, somebody come up with the really clever solution, and then we'll kind of iterate on it. There's a lot of stories like that of people coming up with really slick solutions of very unconventional problems.
Weirdly, David Blaine won that competition. Like. David Blaine was the guy who created the spacesuit shitter. That was his.
What I'm trying to understand is like, what is this?
I was like, how high up is he?
What is it for? Tries to work out David Blaine. Go for it, Troy.
Yeah, it's like understand this man.
3 miles. I'm like, you're like the Red Bull guy went higher, right?
Yeah, it's not even fucking cool, David Blaine, you pussy. 3 miles.
What are you doing?
I say we get some balloons, we go up there, we meet him, we tell him how awful we think his idea is.
Excuse me, hi, Mike Biffle here, Play, Watch, Listen. Just a couple of questions for you. For some reason, I have an old anachronistic mic. Excuse me, Mr. Blaine.
Mr. Blaine.
I want to point out I'm about 6 inches higher than you, so I'm winning right now.
Is he wearing a mask? That would be one of the fundamental separations, right? Like,
I think he's got an oxygen thingy.
He's too narcissistic to wear a mask. That's a mustache.
Just a really, really big mustache. He grew his mustache out so extensively that he can like shape it to be a mask over his mouth.
It actually holds air. That's how big it is now. It can hold oxygen.
Nice.
I mean, I figured that it was a spin-off of Up, and this article references it. I guess it is.
But I wonder, is like
there's no way Pixar is involved in this nonsense.
No.
I can't imagine David Blaine sitting at home watching Up and going,
that could be me.
That's it.
Do I have any balloons?
That's immediately. His first move is to immediately then go poison his wife.
I was going to say, he's sitting next to his wife and he's like, I have an idea. And she's like, oh my God, he's going to make me a book. And then he's like, I'll be right back.
I'll be right back. I don't think David Blaine is married. I don't see that guy having I could be wrong.
I think it'd be hilarious if he turns out to have this like really domestic snapshot of life at home with David Blaine, and it's like, oh sweetie, did you do your homework? I know long division is always a trouble spot, and it's like turns out he's just this.
I can do that problem.
1950s.
You don't believe me? Watch. Yeah, that sounds right.
just before he went in the balloon, like just before this, like it's
no, it was 2014.
Paperwork's over. Oh, okay.
2014.
Fair enough.
Look how bored he looks. He's like, this is a stupid idea.
He's like, I did not think through the timing of this. He's like, I wish
I'd for a while.
I should have had the pee and poop conversation. That's what he's thinking right now. He's thinking I should have had that meeting.
I feel like
you better be doing this. You better be doing this picture-in-picture, Alana. Like this.
I hope he.
I have. I've been showing the feed, so you're good. Yeah, I've been able to do that.
I hope he's binging past episodes of Play, Watch, Listen while he's hanging.
No, I think he's like, all right,
episode's philosophical content. Yeah.
No, it's like this. He was like, and now I finally watched The Wire.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Last season of Game of Thrones. Here we go.
Yeah.
Nobody can tell me.
License for that. It's crazy.
If he falls, we have to re-record all of this. By the way, like obviously.
Oh shit!
Oh no!
You're absolutely right.
We just we didn't do it in real time. Yeah, we have. If he falls,
this episode could age real bad. Yeah.
It really could.
It's true. It started off great. Hey, why do you guys go from episode 27 to 29? We don't need to.
Yes.
There's technical hassle, yeah.
The David Blaine incident. Don't worry about
Just feverish Alana going, we're taking the week off, everybody.
Gave them a break. Bye. Hi, everyone.
Oh, everyone.
Welcome to another episode of Play, Watch, Listen. I'm doing the intro 6 minutes in rather than an hour in like last week. I'm Alana Pierce. I've been in games media for almost a decade. I'm joined by Austin Wintry. He's a video game composer, famously known for Journey. Everything else is fine. It's just that one.
And
really.
Easily dismissed.
Which I really specifically wanted to bring up because last week we asked the question of video games about death, and Austin did not mention Journey himself.
Yeah.
It's funny how I didn't even think about that.
I didn't either.
Until I was perusing the comments on YouTube, and there were multiple people going, Journey.
Yeah.
And what I really loved was that there were people that brought up Journey in a way that made it seem like they actually weren't aware I worked on it. It was like, oh, you should check out Journey. And I was
thinking about it.
I'm pretty sure I could, like, some of these I can feel the sarcasm transparently enough, but some of these seem kind of innocently like, oh, I know exactly the one to suggest.
Funny. I think my
it's just
favorite suggestion was Red Dead Redemption 2. You know you're going to die. And that game did a really good job for me of, like, I was constantly worried about when Arthur was going to die. I was scared. So it was just like this constant thing of, like, anytime anything emotional was happening, being like, oh, is this it? Oh, I'm going to lose him. Oh, no.
Hold on. When do you know that you're going to die?
As soon as you're diagnosed with tuberculosis.
I thought you were like saying the entire game. I was like, hold on.
No,
what?
and I mean, you wouldn't even know when it actually happens because it's that he beats up someone with TB and then it like transfers into his mouth, I guess. So you wouldn't even know initially, but
my thing with that, and it's I carved out time in my life. I was like, I told Pam, I was like, you need to understand when this game comes out, I'm not doing anything. Like, I've been waiting years for this game to come out. And
I'm going to be the David Blaine of this relationship.
Exactly.
He's doing well, by the way. I'm still watching it.
Yeah, no,
I'm still watching it too. It's far more fascinating than this conversation, this little anecdote. But I finally was like, I have time to pick this game back up because I was so deep into it. And there was a corruption with my save game, and it put me back on the island. I went, no, like I grinded to get off that island. I killed the woman and everything. And it was like,
I also had a save game issue.
And went, nope. And I went, I'm never going to finish this game because I love
I'm always
the
game. Same way. It's a strange thing of after you've invested a certain amount of time, if something sidelines that, or if like your, save gets lost or whatever, you got to reinstall. I've had that experience where I'm like,
that's it.
It's done. It's done. Yeah. Like the uphill climb is so unappealing.
Especially the existential terror you're giving me right now is just.
Yeah, dude.
I literally did that to all my playtesters on our next thing this week. This week, I accidentally corrupted all of our save system, so every playtester had to restart our next project from the start. Yeah,
I love that for them.
That's a terrifying thing.
Feature, not a bug.
Scary.
Yeah,
it's not a bug. Feature, not a bug. Yeah, as long as you do it before the game launches, you're all right. That's the
exactly.
That's the one
the funny thing though, like. as a slight kind of corollary to that is when I'm writing a piece of music, every now and again, fortunately, I've gotten really obsessive with my various modes of backup that I don't know that this is really possible anymore. But especially 10 years ago, every now and again, it would happen. Working on something for a few hours, a save file gets corrupted. Back before the software had a built-in autosave feature where it's constantly creating new, files. There were a lot of ways that this could go sideways. And sure enough, every now and again, hours or a day of work would get lost. And what I always found is that when I went, there's the grieving period where you're looking, actually it starts with the denial. Yeah. It starts with the denial where I spend
Thank you for all gathering today. Does anyone want to say anything before?
Basically, yes. I do. It's more like I should rethink my career. This is bullshit. Just absolute instant depression of just like fuck. And then what invariably happens is I have to start from scratch, and the new version is just there's no way it's not better than the previous one.
No,
where applying the lessons learned, right?
Yeah.
Always.
Is that the same with games though? Is that you know what I mean? Like.
No. Well, that's the thing. I always said to myself, right? I think I don't know. It depends on the kind of game, of course. But if it was like an RPG where, I've done a lot of grinding or I've done a lot of exploring, and then now I'm kind of setting the clock back, but with the benefit of all that I learned, I might actually more efficiently make my way through it, which is kind of the hold up of the analogy.
Yeah, but like with Red Dead, that's not possible. It's like you can't.
Right.
You have to do that whole big battle again. You have to do. I was like, I don't want to do. And again, that game is beautiful. It's lovely. And Roger Clark was like, "Did you finish the game yet, Troy? Have you gone through it yet?" I'm like, I need you to know we're always going to be friends. I'm never going to finish that game. As much as I love it, I'm never going to finish that game.
Our friend Jack Attridge, the Erica creative director, he finished the game. I remember when it first came out, and then maybe a month later or something, he posted on I think Instagram, I just finished, and I said, what was your playtime? And he goes like 170 hours or something insane. And I said was that a positive experience? He goes, I kind of feel like I have Stockholm syndrome. He goes, I love the game as a sort of
because it
half consenting captor.
I think it was Jack I went out for dinner with, like when he was in that period, and it really was like the game had hurt him. Like he genuinely, like there was like a 100-yard stare. He was not. It didn't seem like he was having fun. It just seemed like
I finished it in a cinema.
What?
That's classic.
That.
Yeah.
Wait. But you didn't play. You didn't start it there though. You didn't like Alana. You need to leave. You've been here for a month.
Just locked herself into.
No.
Alana's
got a residency.
I think I did the entire epilogue in a cinema by myself.
That would be a good use of cinemas now. I'm realizing they could rent them out person at a time.
It was very cool. I rented it out for Resident Evil 2 Remake and had like a bunch of friends come through with snacks and drinks and whatever, and we played through the whole game, which was awesome. But I basically
did you also have like David Blaine? Did you also have to have meetings? Okay, so what do I need to do in the event?
How's my space?
Here's this popcorn bucket, Alana. Here's this popcorn.
I was trying to figure out a way to get the David Blaine feed to be like permanently in the middle of the video, but then I couldn't figure out how to turn the audio off for it. So. Like I could try it again, but let me reintroduce everyone else. Also joined by Troy Baker, video game actor, and Mike Biffle, video game director.
Yeah, he's more important. By the way, boop, I haven't done it in a while. Boop, boop.
Well,
Mike, always perfect.
Today, right?
Always perfect.
100% strikeout.
100%
just so you understand my perspective. Like this is what this whole thing is all about.
That's what we're here for, right? That is the
Mike's is going to be different, but Mike is down here. By the way, I have to add, you were so missed. Like Alana, you weren't in like our circle at that point, but I wish you would have been there too. You would have had fun that night that we had in London, where Ben was there. Ben came to that dinner, Jack Attridge. We just had this. There's this great restaurant, little pub in London called Punch Bowl, and we rented the upper room, like the Disciples of Christ. Hey, I fit it in there. Someone say Star Wars. It was a great night.
I can't remember why I
would love to have been there.
Yeah, we are being quite boring though by just talking about our friends without like I don't know. Ben,
I wasn't there for that either. I don't know why you singled Alana out as
How's he doing?
Alana's gonna be like, "Hey guys, there's a weird jump in time in the podcast. It was
Don't
the
worry
most
about it."
boring part of any episode we've ever done."
I do want to.
Troy talked about a dinner party.
Have a little bit of crackle.
Dude, I know. Did I tell you what the solution was?
Well, I mean, it's still there.
Gear replacement?
No, from Elgato. They said that the solution is, it goes, oh, if you're on a PC, then you need to do this update. I was like, cool. What's the solution if you're on a Mac? He was like, oh, the solution is different for a Mac. I was like, is it to get a PC? He goes, pretty much.
Excellent.
I love
Today,
that customer service.
Spoken like a true gamer.
Today I wanted to talk a little bit about backwards compatibility specifically. It's been making the news because Ubisoft Australia posted in a Q&A that they then had to update, basically saying, let me find the exact quote, but it's ultimately that the PS5 will not be terribly backwards compatible.
Sorry, David Blaine is falling through the air. Is that intentional?
I know. I just saw that.
Kidding.
Mike and I had the same reaction. I was like,
sorry.
Pull that over real quick. Why is David Blaine falling through the air?
Oh,
Well,
That
he's
was
gonna
part
go
of that's part of the plan.
that's
Did he
part
get
of
to the height
act.
where he wanted to?
I guess
Okay.
so.
It said he'd go to 3 miles and then parachute to the ground.
I want to know what
okay,
flat
fair
earthers are doing right now. I really want to know what flat earthers are doing
There he
right
is.
now.
Look at him fly.
David Blaine's in on it. He's part of the conspiracy.
Wouldn't that be great if he is himself a flat earther and
earther?
is like, I can prove it. I saw the ice wall.
I'm so
That's
sorry
why
for
he did
derailing
it.
this episode, Alana. I'm so sorry. I've ruined the whole
It's
thing.
absolutely fine. It's
understand.
going to suck for audio listeners, but for the
Here's-
video
here's
listeners, you
the,
get good David Blaine content here.
Here's the
people-
question:
Yeah.
is landlocked David Blaine backwards compatible with formerly balloon
That's what I'm saying.
floating David Blaine?
That's
That doesn't
interesting
hold
because
up.
from a consumer perspective, you'd expect that to be the case, but there's actually a lot of very interesting complexities to the differences
That's
between
what
those two
I-
David Blaines.
Very good.
That's the take
Oh, there
I'm
we go.
looking
Parachute.
for, Mike.
We're good.
Very
Yeah,
good.
now it's boring.
Now it's
Wait a
boring.
minute.
Now we know he's going to live. You know, it's fine.
What is the cost to do backwards compatibility for an existing system, right? No,
It's
'cause
between $0 and $1 million.
Yeah, I think the
somewhere
point
in
is
that
that it
range.
varies. So,
Sorry, that sounded way
just-
more dismissive than intended, Troy. Sorry, I was going for a joke, but it actually came
No.
across really well. I
It's
apologize.
not dismissive at all. I'm coming at this
Next
from a
question,
position.
Troy.
I'm coming at this from a position of ignorance, but I always I love the fact that Infinity Ward finally did a remaster of Modern Warfare, Modern Warfare 2, but they only did the campaign, which I understand. But I was like, do the Spec Op missions. Like, I understand why you don't want to support that server wise and do the multiplayer because you're really pushing Warzone and you don't want to split your audience. I get that, but I didn't understand why it was so expensive to do one part but not the other. Like, it feels like if you're just going to do one, do the other. But that's what I was like, what is the
Spec Ops
cost?
the co-op? Is Spec Ops the co-op aspect? though?
Yeah. Well,
So
I
you have
guess
still got
there is a
multiplayer
co-op.
code there, right?
I guess, but you could also, I guess if you're gonna do it, might as well do it all the way. That was my favorite part. The mission was great, but that was my favorite part of that game was the Spec Op missions. But that's why I didn't know. It's like, it's not like we're deving for a new platform, but we already have that code. We're just applying our assets to that. So I don't know what that cost is, but apparently it's tremendous.
Well, it varies.
Can
I
be,
imagine
yeah.
in that case, probably the Call of Duty one was probably millions, like because it was also a bunch of new assets as well. It wasn't just like an up. So that's the other thing is there's like 5 different kinds of ways you can update a game, right? In terms of like it can be just a straight up port with no changes. It can be a port and an upgrade. It can be a complete rebuild. And often like those look very similar to the end user. Like the player doesn't necessarily know which one that is. So for example, with our games, Thomas Was Alone. The PlayStation version of that game was completely rebuilt from scratch because at the time we released that, you couldn't port Unity onto PlayStation. There was no Unity for PlayStation. So we had to literally a dev team of, I think, like 8 people basically rebuilt Thomas Was Alone from scratch in a few months because it was a very simply made game. It was about rectangles, right? It was made by an idiot, it's fine. But literally they built it as a new game, essentially. So, but no one in the audience knows or cares about that, right? Because it ends up being basically the same thing from their perspective. But then you also have like porting, which is, you know, essentially just running in like an emulator or something, like, or is similar to the way you do it with an emulator. So it can massively vary.
But that's not quite
And
the
then you have
same
things
thing
like
as backwards
Spyro,
compatibility.
which
though.
came out, which might as well have been like a full new AAA production because they had to build every
This is the
asset
real
from
trick of
scratch,
David
right?
Blaine, by the way.
Oh, did something go wrong there?
Oh, he's back. You froze for a second there. Yeah, Mike, it's all right.
It was like me doing
it's
you
David
too.
Blaine's fault. It's because he's messing with the satellites. He's just cutting off.
Like he's getting in the way of them. He's getting in the way of them. He's putting balloons in the way of them.
Oh, he saw Mike's signal coming and he reached out and grabbed it.
Well, I guess the main question is what is the benefit, or how if like I as a consumer, I want every game to be backwards compatible, like because I still have my PS3, I still have my I'm gonna keep my PS4 and I'll have a PS5. But what is the benefit to the dev for backwards compatibility?
Well, Troy, if you have those consoles, what's the benefit to you?
Convenience, so that I wouldn't have to, like, I keep my PS3 because there's some games that are not backwards compatible.
I guess I keep them anyway. But I mean, I also love backwards compatibility for the convenience. But I'm trying to figure out how important this actually is to the general public, because it doesn't seem like much of a selling point for Xbox, even though they focus very hard on backwards compatible. It's not making people stay on that hardware, and it's not making them sell any better. It's like, how important actually is it from a business perspective? I think
maybe one of those metrics that people care about, but yeah, I think it's one of those ones that definitely, and I've got in trouble on this podcast before for saying this. Like, there are certain things that players want, but the numbers imply that they don't actually make use of them. Like, they want to know that they could. You want to know, Troy, that you could go and play those games, but you're actually realistically just going to mostly play new stuff.
Yeah, right? I remember when you mentioned that in the context of replayability, and I remember that feeling actually quite not revelatory, but well, actually, in the sense, it's the opposite of revelatory. It was like, that feels very right. I can't ever remember buying a game on the basis of its replayability.
Opposite of revelatory. I'm getting a T-shirt, by the way. That's my T-shirt. The opposite of revelatory.
That's the lesser known origin of Bethelian. It's the opposite of revelatory.
It is an interesting one, because I feel the same way. Like, replayability, I understand the importance again, especially for people who don't have high income, who can only play a certain amount of games in a year. But as much as I like the idea of replayability, I mean, Kingdoms of Amalur: The Re-Reckoning is coming out soon, and I'm like, hell yeah, I love that game. And then I was like, but what about all these other games that I already haven't played? Should I really be playing the Re-Reckoning of Kingdoms of Amalur right now? Because even that is a game that, like, I'm like, oh, but it's updated. But I'm like, shit, but there's so much other stuff that I should be playing.
I mean, you do claim to be a Grant Kirkhope fan, so I guess this is going to be the true test.
I am a fan of Grant Kirkhope. Good dude. It's Banjo-Kazooie, man. It's
there's actually
the greatest soundtrack of all time.
It is. He's phenomenal.
No,
but
come here,
he's my second favorite after Cactus. With I mean, you can't compete with that Hotline Miami soundtrack.
No, you can't.
No, but this is where it gets
no,
really
it's
messy,
specifically
right?
you, Austin.
Yes,
can't.
you.
You
Grant Kirkhope. Grant has no problem competing with Hotline Miami.
So we've already run into the immediate problem of there's a bunch of different things we're talking about here. So there's backwards compatibility, which generally refers to console side. So that's a console that can effectively emulate a previous version of the console. So your Xbox One can pretend to be an Xbox 360 and theoretically run most Xbox 360 games. That's a backwards compatibility.
Doesn't that add a lot of... Sorry, Mike, I wasn't trying to cut you off.
Cool.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask, I seem to recall when the PS4 was coming out that was a big discussion because it was adding a lot to the price point of the console itself. Like,
that was because their solution was to put a literal PS. Was it the PS4 or the PS3 where they literally
I think it was the
basically
PS3.
put the old console? They put a PS2 inside the launch day PS3 just
because
to get
it's
backwards
not that
compatibility.
simple. That's the big thing. Is like I interviewed, I think it was with Ryan McCaffrey while I was at IGN, the backwards compatibility team at Microsoft. That is a full dedicated team. That's not just we just run an emulator. It's a full team whose entire jobs is to make backwards compatibility function.
They're building an emulator. They're building the world's best emulator, which is the other aspect of this, which is I think a lot of the time players have downloaded like a SNES emulator and been able to play Mario, and that's cool. But there's two aspects there.
I'm sorry.
Yo.
The
Super Famicom, I apologize. SNES, SNES.
No.
It's Mario.
There we go.
Oh,
complete.
I was confused.
Is it not SNES? Is it SNES?
I say SNES. You're fine.
I think it's a European thing. I think Europeans say SNES. It's more classy, kind of refined.
Yes,
European,
I am also
Australian.
European. I say SNES. Yes.
But do you,
we think
do
of
you
you
call
as
Nintendo
European. Well, you're in
a
Eurovision,
NES?
so it's you're in Eurovision. It's the same thing.
Yeah, but you don't walk around calling it a NES. Oh, I've got a NES.
I have.
Yeah,
done
you
that
do
before, actually. Yeah.
I'm with Troy on this
Sorry,
one.
it'd be really funny if he just disconnected from the call. If he just left.
Yeah, just
reappears as David Blaine. It's the.
What
I love is
that I've been David Blaine the entire time.
No, but what's funny is that it did actually rearrange where you are in the window now. So now your pointing may be accurate.
Mike Bethel?
He's in a helicopter now, I think.
Blaine is now mocking.
We have David Blaine. David Blaine is in a helicopter. This is the most boring report I've ever done in my entire life.
In a helicopter. Where were we? What is this episode? I don't know.
I was talking about
Emulation. All right, so
I want to come back to the emulation
thing.
Yes. So emulation. So yeah, people have downloaded a SNES emulator, and it's worked, and they've been like, why can't we just have this? The problems are, one, obviously games have got more complicated. Two, what's more important is the emulator you downloaded was not a commercial product that had to hit the criteria that a commercial product does have to. So the emulator you downloaded may break with like 1% of games. It may accidentally damage something. It might not work. It might need testing. It might have a rare bug that when you sell it to 1 million people, that bug comes up 10 times and that's your YouTube video of the thing going wrong. So there's a massive expectation that's applied to the folks doing the Xbox backwards compatibility. They're making an emulator, but it has to be a foolproof emulator. It has to be a really professionally produced piece of software, and that obviously takes time and money and team.
Well, yeah,
and that's cool, but there's always going to be those gaps.
It's not as simple as we made the emulator, now all the Xbox games run. It's that they have to basically re-emulate or tinker with it literally every single game. It's not the same.
Well, that's because every game is a hack. Every game is a hack. Every game is like just teetering on the edge of what you can get away with. Like if you look at something,
all games are like Mad Max vehicles.
They really are.
They billow smoke and like duct tape is holding together core engine parts.
Totally. And actively breaking the engine to do things, right? Like there's almost every console generation. Like in that last year, the reason you're getting all those games that just look way beyond what you could imagine at the start of the generation is those developers have gotten good at cheating. They've gotten good at like breaking the game. There are so many tricks that you can use to basically like use hardware weirdly, like stupid, like running your physics through the sound engine. Stuff like that, like everything you can do to kind of squeeze things out.
I'm listening.
But you can do like that's a bad example because actually you would do it the other way around. But anyway, but you like just squeezing all the performance you can out, which means that any emulator is going to run into problems at the extremes of that. Sorry, I'm just talking a lot. I apologize.
No, I you know, it's interesting.
The one who know best, I think.
The distinction between porting and backwards compatibility is interesting because one of those seems to pose no danger to the particular work that I do. Like running a PS3 game on a PS4, for example, theoretically, you're taking something from a more constrained environment to a less constrained environment. That seems like, presuming the PS4 can handle what it takes to run a PS3 game, the specs of the hardware itself would theoretically be, it would be all the easier for this thing to run, because the thing that I see all the time is when games shift platforms and all the work that we put in to try and make especially super interactive scores, like they just may not be as easily handled on a new piece of hardware. And case in point, I wasn't involved at all, so I don't really know the story here, but as soon as Journey hit PC, I started getting a lot of tweets from people saying the music doesn't work right compared to the PlayStation version. Like it's just not a clean port. And I haven't actually played through it, but it wouldn't surprise me because our system was crazy complicated and it wouldn't take much to break it, I think.
It had never even occurred to me that music would be included in something that is difficult to make backwards or forwards compatible.
Because it's so connected to all the systems of the game that if something's going on wrong with them, the music will basically get confused and not know what to do.
That's why we treat it just like a score. It's like, that's an MP3 that plays. Yeah. I can see a version of this where...
It would be a lot easier.
someone has to kind of run the numbers and say, okay, if we're going to do a remaster of this game, what is the cost of making that game backwards compatible versus doing a remaster? It's kind of like the whole Fight Club thing where Edward Norton says, if we do the data analytics and if the cost of a recall is more expensive than paying out the insurance claim, we don't do one. So I was like, maybe that's what it is. It's like, I understand that you really want a remake of Kingdom Hearts 2 or whatever.
I was going to say, yes, I'm ready.
But what do you think?
Replay value is very relevant on that one.
Perfect example. Would you say there's more value to doing this is all speculative, I understand, but is it more valuable to do a remaster version versus backwards compatibility and amortize that over how much it would cost to make not just Mass Effect backwards compatible, but all of those games backwards compatible versus just doing a remaster? Is it cheaper to just do a remaster of the ones you know will sell versus just doing a carte blanche, like you said, backwards compatibility for all your entire catalog?
Well, you'd still need to do it per game. Like, even if they're in the same engine, there is still, like, each backwards compatibility would also be a discrete kind of job that you had to do. You'd have to get that done, but it would be cheaper.
So if Xbox says
the Master Chief Collection is a perfect example. Is that
okay?
The Master Chief Collection has had to release games staggered, especially now that they're on PC. They're doing them chronologically in order of is chronological the right word? So reaches first is what I'm trying to say here. But it can take them 6+ months to release a new one.
If they go, we are backwards compatible, does that not explicitly say, or at least implicitly mean that all of your games, all your PS3 games, all of your Xbox One games are going to run on this new machine? If you say we are backwards compatible, or is it only saying...
You can't make that promise. Like, even now, there's games that you can't play on the Xbox One from the Xbox 360, right? There's games, I think there's games of mine that you can't play, because basically they didn't sell well enough that anyone's bothered to kind of worry about bringing them forward. I think there's, Dead to Rights Retribution, which was an Xbox 360 game I worked on, which I don't think you can play that backwards compatible on Xbox One, because that team has other things to be doing. So no, you'd never be able to make a 100% backwards compatible system unless you do the PlayStation 3 method of literally taking the bits of a PS2
putting one in
and
there,
sticking them inside the box. The other thing that's
where...
Do you think that gamble paid off for them? Sorry, but just because that is what drove the cost difference, I guess. Mm-hmm. Do you think that was a calculably profitable move, or
no,
it had to?
If it had been, they'd still be selling them a month or two later.
Because
they killed that very quick.
They stopped selling those, and the 360 sold better at the start of the era. So I think that the PS3 did end up selling more than the Xbox 360 by the end. But I think in the beginning they were trying to recover from that. This thing is way too expensive. Like marketing fuck.
It was an engineer's solution.
I do remember
it was a very brute force solution to the problem. It was very much kind of, we're screwed.
We'll just sell you a PS3
with a PS2 inside it. But the other thing here is just really important and worth noting with remasters, and it's interesting you brought up Master Chief Collection. Often the primary purpose of a remaster, because it is a massive investment, is not the expectation that you'll sell and make profit on the game. They're usually marketing. It's usually something you put the effort into to get the audience re-engaged with an IP you've not released anything in, which is why every remaster comes out about a year before the new iteration in the series. Because it's about it's about reminding your audience who've lost interest, the audience who've not played a Halo game in X number of years, hey, here's all the Halo you could possibly want, just to kind of get you back into it. And also to introduce it to a whole new audience. Those are media beats that you can get, you can pay streamers to talk about Halo, you can get all of this noise going. And then when the new Halo comes out, you can kind of ride that wave. That's why those generally happen with first party.
That's why EA won't do it with Mass Effect. It seems so obvious. They just aren't guaranteed to make the millions. Everyone's like, you're gonna make so much money from Mass Effect. I don't think that's true.
So funny. It's so weird.
No, that will be the announcement of the new Mass Effect game. Will be the box. Once that box set of the Mass Effect trilogy comes out, then congratulations, you're getting a Mass Effect announced at the next E3. Like, that's like clockwork every single time. The only outsider on that is sometimes first party. So something like Last of Us is a really interesting case in point where that first game. Have you heard of Last of Us? That's one that I think we've talked about on the show before. The Last of Us when that came.
Platformer?
It was a 2D platformer. Yeah, it was from the Banjo-Kazooie guys. But it came out right at the end of the console generation, right? So they did the remaster onto PS4 because it was basically bluntly high quality content they could get relatively cheap as a game for the PS4 at launch, where they needed as much content as they could get. So sometimes first party will do it for that reason. Obviously that remaster wasn't trying to sell you on Last of Us 2, because Last of Us 2 was 7 years away by the time that version of the game came out. So yeah, so it's usually done with an ulterior motive. Like there's usually a reason to do a remaster beyond, or checking in on whether Crash Bandicoot's popular. You know, before you bring out the Crash Bandicoot, the new Crash Bandicoot, you do the market research by re-releasing the Crash Bandicoot remaster. I think it was a year before or a couple of years before. You see if the audience is there. You see which audience are interested in it. What are the streamers who are into Crash Bandicoot? The easiest way to find that out is to release a remaster, see where that goes, and go, okay, these are the 10 big influencers that we need to make sure are involved in the audience. So it's a market research thing as well. There's a lot of. It's not just about how many units you can sell.
That's really, really smart, because you're like, okay, if it costs us, for easy math, if it costs us $1 million to do a remaster of this, and we find out that people don't want this, we just saved ourselves potentially $25, $30, $50 million or more of doing that. That's really smart.
There will be games you've never heard of coming out that got cancelled because of a remaster doing badly. There will be. I don't know of any, but there will be development teams who are working on a new iteration of the franchise, and the remaster came out and no one cared, and that was quietly
Tony
shelved.
Hawk right now.
Will have happened.
Which is crazy.
This is
that
why
one looks like a remake, but it is a remaster. It's nuts.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's it.
That's why, like, I ask about, because my perspective on backwards compatibility, just because the limit of my knowledge extends only so far, right? So I understand a little bit about what happens behind the scenes, but like when they come out at E3 and they go, and we will be backwards compatible, and the fanfare falls and the confetti and everything, my dumb brain automatically assumes I can play every game I currently have a disc for on that new machine. That's what I assume.
Sometimes they don't even have licenses. So sometimes you aren't, and I think the Xbox team said this, that they aren't allowed to make every original Xbox game forwards compatible because they don't have the license to do that for some of them. So it's. But
do you think that that's kind of like, that's in the fine print? You know what I mean? It's the public facing of that is more people like me going, I can play. That's why they put that feature on there, is because people go, again, I may never use it, but I want to know that it has. Like every car that has OnStar, most people never use it, if that's still even a thing. But
that's the thing that Xbox is.
It's a feature that you have. There's all sorts of shit that my car can do that I never. Elon Musk is a big component of this when it comes to everything that Tesla does. Most owners of a Tesla only use like 30% of the features of what the car can do, but they tell you all the features so that you buy it. Do you think that's a marketing ploy for backwards compatibility, where it's like people will think that their existing catalog has more value than it really does?
I think it's actually, well, what's interesting is it's becoming more true. We're heading towards, I think, and I don't know how far it is, the licensing thing that Alana mentions is a really big issue, and that's come up a few times with a few major games, like Marvel licensed stuff, for example. Like I remember when there was a Deadpool game with, it was Nolan North, right, playing Deadpool in this Xbox 360, and you can't buy that game anymore. Comes up all the time with licensed stuff.
It's an Activision one, I think.
High Moon.
It was Activision, but I think Activision lost the Marvel license, so
must have,
so unless you can find it on disc.
And that's a really good point. Like I remember when we were doing Telltale Batman, we had to ship that game because they held the license for this narrow window period. And if we didn't ship the game, they lost it. And I was like, what does that mean? It's like, we can't do the game. We get like a 2-year window, and we have a hot potato. And I was fascinated by that. So that's why it again, there's making games is hard. I'm learning.
Yeah, it is.
But I do go ahead, Mike.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. I apologize. I want to.
You're not at all. I'm trailing off my thought.
The thing you said about
the existential.
The thing you said about like
how hard it is.
The expectation you have that your content like that essentially your back catalog will retain its value and you can keep playing these games. That does, from a technical point of view, that is becoming easier every day, because essentially, and this is what you see with the Xbox approach, which is basically we're gonna iterate hardware like a mobile phone or like an iPad. Like we're gonna keep releasing Xboxes, and you get the one the year you want a new Xbox, and that's gonna kind of exist in the ecosystem for 3 or 4 years before it becomes obsolete. So you're not like selling a console every 8 years, you're selling a console every year, and then the audience just kind of come in and out as they want. With that being the case, there is a requirement for a consistency of compatibility that lasts a bit longer. That doesn't mean it lasts forever, which we've seen already with like iOS games that you can't play anymore, stuff like that. So there is still a shelf life, but that's coming in where it becomes sorry, Troy, you want to say something, mate? I apologize. I'm just pouring one out for my Zuma. There's an iPad that I keep that I will never update because it's the only thing I can play Zoom on. Yeah, but that's what they're going for. But where it gets really interesting is that if we end up with a Game Pass style system, that gets even trickier in the same way as Netflix, like because your content no longer exists on your shelf. It's a library that is on an exterior server. So Gears only exists until it doesn't. Now, obviously, it will exist forever. It's Gears, but there's a lot of, like with Netflix, there are things that will fall off. There are things. How many times have you been watching? Like, it's happened to me so many times where I've been like halfway through a show on Netflix, stop watching it for a month, come back, and it's gone from Netflix because of different deals. Or
in different regions too. Like, there's some shows that I can watch. Oh my God. Before DuckTales was on something, I was like in the city, I was like, oh my God, they have DuckTales, they had Robotech, or there was something weird on Netflix. And I was like, I can't believe it. And I came back home, they're like, no. And I went, no. How?
So, Mikey, you saying that with systems like Game Pass, which does feel like the inevitable direction that we're headed in, really, backwards compatibility will get harder? Or is it more that you're saying that it's just that we will have no ownership of those things because they get taken off the server and we lose them entirely?
I'm saying that, like, in theory, from a consumer point, like, as with all these things, there'll be loads of work behind the scenes by developers, of course, but from a consumer point of view, in theory, something like Game Pass means that backwards compatibility won't need to exist because it won't, from a consumer point of view, it won't be a generational console world anymore. It'll be, I own an Xbox. Oh, which model do you have? Oh, I've got the 2020 Xbox. Or I've got the 2019 Xbox. And
they're making it like an iPhone.
There will be exactly, that's what I'm saying. But like the iPhone, there will inevitably be technological leaps where you will no longer be able to play much older games. And that's where it gets interesting. We're going to slide back into that need for backwards compatibility at that point. But what's interesting with modern consoles is they are basically built on PC architecture, which means that in theory, it's easier to port stuff across.
Sure.
In theory.
But that's the same thing that you're saying, though. It's like, I own, like, I've got something stupid like 500 movies in my iTunes because I'm a buyer. I like to build my collection. But that's different than having like a bookshelf right over there.
But things still disappear from it, right?
Yes.
I actually got into an argument with someone from Apple because I think it was What We Do in the Shadows, the comedy movie. I owned it on iTunes.
Right.
It disappeared from my iTunes, and I called them, and they were like, "Yeah, the distributor removed that version of the film and has put up a new version." I was like, "Cool. Can I just have the new version of that film there? Same film. Can you fix that? Just move the thing over." "No, I'm afraid you'd have to repurchase it. You don't technically own anything on iTunes. Thank you, sir." So that because I'm like you, Troy. I like to
which the only response was, "Do you know who I am?"
Yeah, I'm Mike Bithell. Perhaps you didn't hear my name.
I'm very popular way,
like Netflix.
He was actually outside Apple floating on the.
Sir, please come down. But that's the same thing with games, and I know Alana, this is a big button with you. It's like not actually physically or in any way owning that game. That there's going to have to be a tremendous leap in culture, in mindset of buying that game, which means that naturally as Game Pass develops, there will not be the notion of paying $12, $15, $20 for an album is, people are like, "What, are you crazy?"
If it's not on vinyl, that's a complete non-starter.
Right. If it's not some collector's thing. But why would I pay? You paid $60. Do you remember? Most of you guys probably don't remember this, but before, like in the 90s, even to buy a videotape of a movie would cost like $350.
What?
Like
Yes,
a Disney animated movie. I remember those were the ones that were really expensive.
Anything. It was like, and I worked in a video store where it was like the replacement cost of, so every video that owned it in a video store that wasn't a Blockbuster or whatever, if you looked at that cost, it was like that movie cost $250. I was like, what are you talking about? It costs $4.99 to rent. It's like, right, that's how we make our money back. But to own that movie, like, you want to own a copy of this? That's like owning a print of that movie. And so it used to cost $250. In the same way that there was a whole generation of phones that were, if you wanted to go
make sure you rewind that shit.
That's Be Kind Rewind. In the same way that if you wanted to go buy a phone, a cell phone cost $800. It was like, and then I remember the day that this feels like a tangent, but I'm going somewhere with this. I remember the day that it happened. I was standing. I worked at a cell phone shop.
It's honestly disappointing to know this is going somewhere. I prefer the tangents.
Back in my day,
I remember where I was in this. I worked at a cell phone store, and my manager was like, "Holy shit!" And he showed us in the newspaper. There was an advert that someone had taken out going, the Motorola StarTAC was the phone. It was this clamshell phone. It was a small phone, and everybody wanted it. And some store was saying, we're giving it away for $1. And it was because they were going to make the money off the cell phone contracts that they could amortize that loss or that cost over the course of 2 or 3 years. You had to sign up for 2 years, and they were like, we're willing to do this. Exactly. And so what it did was it dropped the value of phones because now phones were $1. And it wasn't until 2006 or 2007 when the iPhone came back and Apple went, it's $500. People are like, you're out of your mind. I've been paying $30, $20, $1 for a phone. And they're like, we're selling hardware. We're not selling contract service. Now, we partner with AT&T or we partnered with Sprint, and you can get a reduction in the cost if you sign up for new service with them. But if you want to buy this phone, and finally, over the last 14 years, people have gone, oh, phones now cost $500. So we're going to hit that peak where a game, to buy a game, we're going to look and go, you used to pay $60 for a game? It's $9.99. It's $15 a month. That's scary.
There are
well, then that's why every AAA.
Do scare me. Yeah. No, go ahead. That's all I have to say.
I was just gonna say that's why every AAA. That's why every AAA game company is building games as a service. That's why every game now is, we're going to keep you playing for months. This is a lifestyle game, because they're basically preempting where they believe, and probably are right, the market's going to go, which is that you're not going to pay $60
and that was before Game Pass.
But is that developing out of fear, or is that developing out of proactive response?
I think it's proactive. I think the scale of AAA requires it. I think on the indie side, I don't think I require it. I think I can make a smaller game, and I know that there's going to be a niche who want to play my kind of game, and they'll see it.
Are you the vinyl of games? Are you the
like 100%? Yeah. No, if I was actively making games that cost as much as a major AAA game costs to make, I think I'd probably be looking in the live service thing. It wouldn't suit my tastes and what I like to make and how I like my games to feel, but like, I'd probably be leaning in that direction, because I think they're probably right. I think the luxury AAA game for $60 outside of the kind of the system seller, essentially the kind of the first party game, I think is not going to last for much longer. I do think that hipsters like me can do essentially the equivalent of like Etsy games that we can sell to you, kind of, because they appeal to the audience. But we see it, our audience is aging up. Like the people who buy my games in particular are the older audience who have no problem with paying $20 because they're getting something that they feel is authored, that has no microtransactions, that is that kind of game that they like. But the younger audience coming up couldn't care less about some of them play my games, but but as a whole, they're into Fortnite. They're playing games. They're free. Games are free. I might buy a cool outfit, but games are free. They don't. Yeah. That's a completely different shift.
I feel like, but with Fortnite as the example, all it takes is one game to shake that whole thing up again, to come along and be like if, let's say that we enter into this period where it's only games dominating the landscape, like Fortnite, games of service type games for years and years. And then, 5 years into that, there's a relaunch of the Uncharted series. There's a new God of War for the first time in a decade, or and then suddenly it's like, oh shit, this is the craze, and the whole thing shifts again.
But that takes nerve, right? That you've got to be pretty brave to be the people who invest the money into that kind of project.
So I guess it'll be
Fall Guys is
it'll
insane.
be
Fall Guys
Kojima then, I guess.
Throw a note out there. Yeah, I wrote a really big feature about this exact thing, about like games of service and why things are trending that way. I think I interviewed like 26 different studios, and one of the things that multiple people said that I wouldn't have realized if I hadn't done that outreach was that trends are showing that gamers are playing more of video games but buying less diversity of video games. So gamers right now are playing more hours and putting more money into the same one thing and buying less things overall. So if you want to
Fortnite, Minecraft.
Pretty much. I still play Minecraft. Yeah. If you want people to invest in your company, you ultimately have to make a games as service game, get them on that versus everything else, rather than releasing 3 games in a year, because they aren't going to buy 3. They're going to buy 1 and play it for 400 hours.
But that's why I feel like, in the same way that the Beatles needed the Stones, Fortnite needed PUBG, right? Because PUBG tested those waters, proved it, and Fortnite went hold my beer, which is why it's so interesting.
Because it was like DayZ and H1Z1, like that trend took such a long time to get to Fortnite for sure, and they still had Save the World to start with.
I was going to say, Fortnite did not begin as a battle royale at all.
No, dude. I remember Fred Tatasciore and I went in and did a trailer for Fortnite, and then years later, I mean, we're talking like years later, Donald Mustard even reminded me of that. Like, do you remember that trailer we did? I'm like, yeah, when does that game come out? And he goes like, no, we're doing something different now. But it was a totally different game.
Yeah.
And I think that, God, I'm getting emails like crazy. No. I just, it to me is, and I've even said this to Donald, like, I appreciate what Fortnite has been able to accomplish, but I don't think it's necessarily good for games. I think that it becomes, in the same sense that it's a black hole. It draws in people to gaming, but it doesn't allow them to view the landscape. You're so hyper focused on just one thing. And I think that I
agree with that.
I think it depends. Yeah. I think Fortnite does a lot of really cool stuff. As a platform, I think it's incredibly cool.
That's the thing. It's almost like Second Life at this point. Like it's
a licensing platform.
It's I mean,
they put a Black Panther statue in this week, which I thought was really nice. So now a monument to Black Panther.
It's the closest thing to the Oasis from Ready Player One that we have. Right. So, I mean, I think that there's really cool things that they do. Not only has it shifted, like more people are playing, but it's also, it's shifting towards event gaming, as opposed to like the whole seasons thing was kind of a big motion.
What Anthem was trying to do. Forza Horizon doesn't.
Plus, not to mention that they're, I think, and obviously I'm speaking on Mike's turf with this one, but their ability to inject capital into game developers, obviously as a play to make the Epic Store a thing, but just to me, if nothing else, so many developers have received money from Epic on the back of Fortnite to make their game that has nothing to do with Fortnite. That alone, I'm like, I have a hard time looking anything negative about, even if I hated the game, which I don't at all. But let's just say I thought it represented the death of games and all things evil. It would be hard to make that claim on the sheer basis.
That is exactly what Troy said. I remember him saying it's the death of games and all evil.
That's my other quote that's coming up. If you're following along,
Troy Baker, 2020.
Hold on. What is that? Give me an example, because I may not be aware of this. I'm so babe in the woods in this episode. But what are you talking about? Like what game?
Just the sheer. Well, yeah, like maybe a certain.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's in no way private that John Wick Hex was released exclusively on the Epic Store at launch.
Oh no. Okay,
I didn't do that for niceness. That wasn't free.
I thought you were saying though
nothing.
Fortnite specifically. I didn't. I mean, obviously, Epic as the umbrella is being able to do that.
Would have been the Fortnite money. Like I think Austin's 100% right. Like I don't think I would have. I don't think the Epic Store would be doing those kind of deals if they didn't have just this enormous bag of
You could
Fortnite
make
cash.
that case. Not all companies are doing that, right? So like EA, I feel like are in this like complicated position where they have Ultimate Team, which makes so much money that when you look at, you know, their shareholder meetings, because EA is a publicly traded company, you got to be like, but why aren't all these games making that much money? Why is that one making that much money? And how do we make all the others make that much money? You're failing if you're not making Ultimate Team money, which is absurd because nothing else is making Ultimate Team money. I don't think Fortnite's even making Ultimate Team money. It's absurd.
Really?
I don't think so. I think it's still Ultimate Team makes more money. I think GTA's definitely up there with Shark Cards. But I don't
I
think
spent
Fortnite's...
so much money on shark cards.
I know,
so
that's how they
money.
get you. And that's going to be a problem with them too, is that they're going to be like, how do we make shark card money and everything? And that becomes this like massive trend. But in theory, you could say that EA puts that money into the EA Originals program. Because I mean that, you know, Ultimate Team was making a lot of money and they still shut down Visceral. They've still had losses as a result of like, you know, making a tremendous amount of money. I feel like for them it's become everyone else needs to make more, not we can put this funding into Dead Space 4, which is just a whole mess. But, and I've probably spoken about it on the show before, but I always try to hype it up because I think it's fantastic and you know, a lot of people hate EA, but you got to give them credit for when they do something right too. The EA Originals program, EA doesn't profit from that program at all. The indie studios keep their IP and they make all of the money. Yeah, so like A Way Out, for example, EA paid for the marketing and I think they get their money back, but that made Joseph Fares rich because
isn't A Way Out the fuck the Oscars guy?
Yes, that's what I say. All of their marketing dollars, they went, we just need to let him loose.
Yeah, exactly. Did any of you play that game? I've had that game installed in my EA store, and I've never actually played it. Either. But it looked decent.
It's a pretty fun co-op game. Yeah, played it through my girlfriend. Yeah, it's pretty fun.
That's the thing is, I feel like I'd want to play it with someone else. And
you do.
The other one was like Faya, which is Zoink Games, who I think make a lot of really nice indie games. They have a really creative catalog of stuff that they make that I really appreciate. But it's the same thing. They keep the IP. And they get all of the profit. It's like, EA, I don't understand why they're doing it, because they're not doing it for positive PR, because they don't talk about it. I'm like, what? I just don't get it.
Interesting.
But in theory,
they're the Keanu of big publishers that just sort of quietly do human kindness that no one's paying attention to.
Potentially a recruitment thing. To get working with those studios. I really don't know, but you could make the case that like Ultimate Team money gives them the blanket where they can do that, and they are helping indie studios really significantly for the ones that actually do partner with the Originals program. It's super impressive. For the record, it wasn't always like that. I did have friends who were in talks with EA about the Originals program at a point in time where it was much more restrictive, but I guess they opened it up. So yeah, it's cool, and it's just the games as service thing makes things really complicated because, like I said, every publicly traded company in the industry is looking at every other publicly traded company in the industry and saying, why aren't we making this much money? How do we make that much money? And that's why I think like I'm very glad that PlayStation operates the way that they do, because I don't think they're going ahead in that direction when they want to continue having their studios make these big blockbuster AAA titles with a lot of creative freedom, because then people will buy a PlayStation 5. People will feel passionately about the caliber of the quality of games, which is even then an interesting one, because statistically people buy more third-party games than first-party games anyway. But glad that they still exist, and I hope that other people keep that up.
But
go ahead.
There's always a money funnel. Like, that's the thing, is like, and it's not, I don't think it's a cynical statement. Obviously, as you said, any publicly traded company, the primary objective is to make money. And most privately funded companies, like, the objective is to make consistent income so you can pay your staff, right? So there's always a money funnel. So it's come up with, with remasters. Often, even if they're not selling it to make money off the units they sell, it's a marketing thing. With the console guys, they're trying to sell the console. There's always an angle. EA has to do live service games because they don't have a thing they can sell you for $500 to put on your TV. So they have to be working out different routes to making that money. So it's kind of always just very kind of logical and predictable usually, that you can kind of go, okay, well, the reason they're doing this is definitely money, because of course it is. There's usually a pretty straightforward route to where that would come in.
I always
one of them that
is that cynical? It sounds cynical when I say
it is, but it's also realistic. Like I always want to say in a lot of these cases, especially where EA is concerned, people will be like, "Why is their press conference bad?" Like I'm not interested in any of this. Are they stupid? I'm like, no, it's that you're not their main customer. The stock market is. Like, sure, you buy the games, but EA doesn't care if gamers don't like their press conferences. It just doesn't matter. You're like, okay, be mad. I'm sure there are people in PR and marketing teams who do take that stuff seriously and try very hard. I don't want to discredit any of them. I've had friends who worked in EA marketing, and it sounded like it was tremendously difficult. But it's ultimately, when it comes down to it, shareholders, stock market are their actual customers.
The notion of a remaster as marketing, just kind of slightly reeling it back to earlier, the one that I keep turning around in my head wondering about, because I think that's a very fair observation, that the sequel is always announced 6 months after a successful remaster release or whatever, case in point. One of the ones a couple years ago was when Double Fine did a pretty thorough remaster on Grim Fandango. And my only thought would be, I heard that actually did very well for Double Fine, because it introduced it to a whole, that game, it had been 20 years basically since that game came out, and obviously it had never been available on modern hardware. And so that, exposed it to a whole new crowd. And so it was almost like a new release, but they did put considerable resources into that. And I guess it's just sort of the brand elevation of Double Fine itself, as opposed to and now Grim Fandango 2.
Well, actually with Double Fine, that might be the exception that proves the rule. Like Double Fine's really interesting. I can't remember I'm really embarrassed. I can't remember the name of, I think, former now CFO.
Oh, it's Tim Schafer.
I don't think they're the CFO, the guy who stood next to Tim Schafer with a big bag of money, that guy, who was very good. One of the things I remember kind of hearing through the grapevine, one of the brilliant things Double Fine did, and I think they covered this in the documentary they made. Double Fine are so good at finding old revenue streams and working out how to, because they've just constantly throughout their entire existence needed cash to keep making games. So they were very good at actually going, okay, well, we've got Grim Fandango, we could probably make some money from that, so get the remaster done. So at that scale, because they were in that kind of middle space between AAA and indie, they were kind of in that middle zone with their San Francisco office and their large staff. Like, they needed to be making serious money, but not AAA money.
Double Fine are a very interesting one to watch right now, because they've been they are Game Pass model now. They're owned by Xbox, so watching them is going to be super interesting. How much does Double Fine change?
That transition.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that with the case of Grim Fandango, as someone who regularly refers to that as possibly my all-time favorite game, one of the funny things about it, this is a tangent.
You got to be quick, Austin, because Troy has to go.
Yeah, Troy's very politely told us all to hurry up and move along.
Everybody, shut the fuck up. I gotta go.
Well, then now is a perfect moment for a tangent. So one of the things that stood out about Grim Fandango was 1998, and it was one of the first games that had pervasively live musicians in the score. And it was not all done with MIDI, and the reason why is because it was a lot of solo instruments. It was a low-cost score to produce by comparison. But the thing that always bugged me as a player was that, as someone who listened to a lot of orchestral music growing up, I'd be playing the game and you'd have this, amazing, growling tenor sax solo when you're in like Hector Lemon's office. And then you have Manny Calavera with his, beautiful tango played by Peter McConnell. And then there'd be like a scene of you moving along the edge of the rooftop to sneak into the office. And this fake orchestra comes in that's just so obviously fake. And so the thing that I loved was, part of the remaster was they hired the Melbourne Symphony, and they picked up those.
Oh, no way!
There's very few cues in the score that use an orchestra, but for those few that do, they swapped them out and actually recorded them properly. So the 95% of the score was basically done and perfect for 20 years, and then they finally kind of did a 20-year patch on the fake bits, and I was like,
just for Austin Wintory. It's like,
I
noticed.
I actually begged them to conduct those sessions, because I was like, you don't have to pay me, I just have to. And they were like, the problem is it's in 2 days and it's in Melbourne and it's like a 3-hour. It's a very short set. You'd spend 10 times more time on the plane getting there than the
actually
recording session itself.
That's dope. Very cool. I didn't know that. I fucking love that game
it's
too.
that's to me like that's remaster. You know, that's a proper remaster.
Planes.
Yeah. All right. Well,
I've read about
on the
those.
topic of remembering planes, we gotta go. All right, bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye.